everybody, and welcome to another bold prediction from Dissecting Fiction. I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christian Cutlick.
And today I think we're going to talk a little bit. I know my prediction is going to be based around video games. We are now in our current generation, which only a few weeks ago would be the next generation. And I think there's a lot to discuss about that, and I have a couple of theories of what we're going to see in the next year or so. I'm going to say this. Right now, both the Xbox and the PS5 are having some issues, but I think they're going to get past that probably within the next year or so. I'm sure we'll get enough updates to hardware and software to correct all of that. I think by next Christmas, they're both going to have pretty good libraries behind them, but I think they're going to be facing a new Nintendo system in 2022. Nintendo seems to be kind of maneuvering in that way. I think this system will play Switch games because I think the Switch is kind of already somewhat iconic. It sounds kind of weird to say, but I think it's probably one of the coolest devices they've ever put out, and the Switch will become more the portable system, while this new system will be able to at least compete with the graphics on the Xbox Series X and PS5, but also be able to continue the fun from the Switch games.
That's an interesting prediction because on my end, I kind of hope they never really switch off of the Switch. I think they'll eventually make upgrades to it, but I think like the Switch is kind of the totality of like Nintendo's mentality on video games, and that they should be easy to play, they should be portable, you can play them anytime, and they're not necessarily hindered by graphics. Like even when they announced the Switch, like it did have graphical capabilities, but there's no way on the level of the PS5 or the Xbox bunch of numbers and letters.
It's Xbox Series, whichever one you pick, right?
Yeah.
I said X because it has a disc drive, and I don't like not owning my games.
Yeah, I have the same problem. Like I fear like if they make a PS5 next year, and that's like the cheaper version is not going to have a disc drive. So many people buy digital now, which is beyond me.
we should just do an entire episode about how buying digital doesn't make any sense.
like I buy tons of stuff on Steam, but like I've bought too many games on the PS3 that I just can't play now. For a reason PS4 won't fucking download them.
I think you might be right about the digital thing too. I'm not convinced that we're gonna get a new version or a drastically new version of the PS5 that has a disc drive. I think the price will certainly come down. That's proven true over and over and over again. It's another reason to wait a year before you buy a new console. I would say there are three big reasons. One, usually those first versions of the consoles don't operate too well. Last generation, we didn't have that problem as much as we had in the past, but it seems to be coming back. Two, you almost definitely get a price drop. And three, in the meantime, you can buy the last generation's games super, super cheap for like that last year, and I do that like every time, and it's great.
I mean, despite all the problems PS5's having, it's not like the Xbox 360 or the Xbox that were like literally bursting into flames, and like, you know, Red Ring of Death was a meme for a while in the Xbox community.
Yeah, I actually had my second Xbox 360 only a few months ago. Red ringed on me. Isn't that actually third? I'm sorry, third. That's how bad it was. Third 360 red ringed in 2020. So that one made it pretty far. But yeah, to your point, with the way things are going, I do agree that the Switch is the brand for Nintendo, which is why I think it's not going to be this year that anything is said. And I think you might be onto something, that it might be sort of just an upgraded Switch. But, you know, they've done things like that in the past. You know, the expansion pack for N64, which let it do more. I think Nintendo's in like a really nice spot where they have a good install base. they have a great catalog, and if they can carry over pretty seamlessly. I don't think that we're gonna get that Breath of the Wild sequel on this new system or anything. I think the new system probably is gonna get like a Mario to launch, something like that. And this is, obviously my theory, just trying to interpret what I'm reading. But I think Nintendo is going to stay like a pretty big player. They're not going to get beaten back as they did during like the Wii U era. Even arguably the later N64 era was kind of strange. They were trying to compete with systems that they could not compete with. Nintendo hasn't always been perfect, but yeah, I agree. The Switch is Nintendo right now, and I think anything that comes after it is going to be built off of it.
I think you can kind of see examples of this when had the DS, and the DS went through a couple iterations until it eventually became the 3DS, and then the 3DS went through a couple iterations, but they were all generally the same line that whole time. I don't think they'll do like expansion packs like they did with the Nintendo 64. That era is just like dead and done with at this point. And they never did anything with like that with the GameCube, but even like the Wii U was kind of a weird like upgraded version of the Wii. And that was part of the whole downfall of the Wii U in of itself.
Yeah, and I want to clarify. I don't think there's going to be an expansion pack for the Switch. I meant sort of that sort of deal like you were talking about with the Wii U, where you're really basing your next step off of what is working. I think the Switch is even stronger than the Wii, and the Wii was super strong. I think the Switch, having a lot of friends of different ages, and knowing that the Switch does well with children, like the Switch is just like enchanted everyone.
Yeah. No, it's super convenient all the time. I've never had any problems with it outside of the Joy-Con drift that Nintendo refuses to acknowledge happens. My bold prediction is going back to comics, to our last episode, which was about Dark Knight's Death Metal. My bold prediction is that I think we're going to see more and more indie studios crop up and really take a bite out of the market now. I mean, right now we obviously have IDW, Dark Horse. We have those big names in the market right now, but slowly we've been seeing more and more comic companies kind of slip up through the cracks. Like, definitely has been trying to bring more manga to the market. They have a beautiful Berserk Deluxe Edition. But my bold prediction is that as DC and Marvel might leave the market in the future, that these smaller indie companies will really take up the helm. They will really try to push their comics and not try to do like a bunch of properties like a Ghostbuster comic and try to like really truly original indie title, Ninja Turtles and the like.
Look, we did a lot of theorizing in that last episode about where DC could go with this perhaps reduced releasing schedule and loose continuity. I think, ultimately this is all part of the corporate view of how to put out product based on these franchises. I think if Marvel and DC, which they may not, we kind of don't know what's coming, but if Marvel and DC do continue down this road where it's going to be sort of the more and more blockbuster oriented type storytelling, it's a huge, huge, huge opportunity for creator owned small press, even Image stuff to really take a huge hold of the market, because they would be catering to comic book readers where, Marvel and DC might be trying to cater to, Walmart. It's the lesson of Image Comics that, Image Comics started off super hot and then, cooled, but is still around. And it's sort of like Todd McFarlane was right, is really the message of the last couple of years, that, if you deliver what people want and you do it consistently, you're going to have your ups and downs, but you're always going to have a market. It's telling to me that Spawn stuff, after being like, Spawn was always selling some issues, but now back issues from the points where the distribution was low are like going through the roof. because people are realizing like Spawn is delivering what Marvel and DC aren't as often. And I think there's plenty of room for other creators to come in and go like, hey, you want to read comics that aren't weighed down by corporate politics? Here we go.
Yeah, and to think even just like seeing Jeff Johns dive into these independent, I know a lot of people kind of creators are kind of want to do their, they don't want to really be beholden by all this stuff either, but creative freedom and everything as well. And I think even just seeing the success of so many of these indie comics right now is a huge sign that, you know, the tide's turning in favor of indie comics again.
Yeah, no, there's a ton of evidence. I'm actually really hoping that Johns goes back and does something with the Possessed, which is something he did under the Cliffhanger banner really early in his comic book career. I'm hoping that a lot of these guys, you know, even some of the older creators who have really, you know, have kept up on their creator-owned stuff. I think we're about to see a really big boom. Mike Allred's X-Ray Robot has been awesome and is getting like a lot of good attention. Um, and look, a lot of these guys, you know, same as a lot of us comic book readers, you know, grew up on the superheroes and want to write Batman. They want to do those stories, but if you know the noose is tightening, it's not as much fun. And you know, there is another rumor, something we didn't bring up in the last episode, which maybe we should have. Is there's another rumor that page rates are starting to drop at both Marvel and DC, and quite frankly, some of these creators don't need to make less money if they go to Image.
Yeah, it's probably not a good idea to really work for Marvel and DC. Like, you know, Jeff Lemire made his own like Black Hammer universe, and I guess kind of really been my bold prediction is that, you know, we're going to see more and more of these comics kind of crop in as independent, like the replacements, really. And even now, like, I'm going to use the example of Copra, which was a comic that was being published by Image, and he's selling his books on Etsy now, and it's working really well for him. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. These independent creators kind of self-releasing comics too, because now it's so much easier than ever to do it between Kickstarter, tons of other places you can sell your own comics and print on. For example, you know, Kickstarter has tons of comics by creators. There's like a hack and slash omnibus being produced. The future of comics is seeing more and more of the creators take more and more control.
Yeah, I was surprised to see how big those numbers on Kickstarter, Indiegogo are for comics. I believe Kickstarter just actually released a bunch of information on how you know, different types of media they were selling were doing, and comics were like an amount of money I did not expect to see. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was, but it was big. It's somewhat similar to Marvel and DC's issues in the 90s when like a lot of independent creators were allowed to come up, but a totally different marketplace, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, I think is a very cool thing too, in that like we're going to see more creative stories. We're going to see more cool things out there outside of just Marvel and DC.
Well, I think those are you know, I think we both presented pretty interesting predictions there. Not to pat myself in the back too much. If you guys agree, please rate this, give it a thumbs up, subscribe. I don't know, hit the bell thing, whatever things you're supposed to do, do it. If you're looking for us on social media, we're pretty much everywhere. Just type in Dissecting Fiction and whatever social media you're looking on, and I'm sure you'll find us somewhere on something you use. We're on Vero if you only use Vero. Vero's pretty great. If you're in the market for some toys, statues, anything of that kind, check out ToyStoreGuide.com. They'll hook you up with some great independent businesses in your area. Very much need your business these days. That's the same for any of your local businesses, comic shops, record stores, restaurants, anything else. Dry cleaners. There's lots of independent businesses you should be helping out right now. Make sure you're doing so. Anything else, Christian?
Yeah, check out Steve Lichman. It's a webcomic online. You probably saw some memes from it accidentally, but it's about a guy called Steve Lichman who is a lich, and he just wants to live his life peacefully in a cave, but all these dang adventures keep bothering him. It's a really funny comic, and he's friends with like Cthulhu Mans and Draculas, and they just kind of do things like visit their parents and have like really weird normal lives.
I'm gonna go. We were talking up all the indie stuff. I'm gonna say something. If you are not reading Juggernaut right now at Marvel, you should be. It's super cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
But that brings us to the end of this episode. I'm Vinny Murphy,
And I'm Christian Kutlick.
and thanks for listening.